Now, the Hunt Palmer Show.
Yes! I feel like I've been waiting for this my entire life.
You're listening to the Hunt Palmer Show on 104.5 ESPN Baton Rouge.
Jolly good fun. Jolly good.
Locking down the middle of the day.
America's favorite daytime fun show.
Live from the Mercedes-Benz of Baton Rouge studio. This is Hunt Palmer.
Hunt Palmer coming to you from the Mercedes-Benz of Baton Rouge studio downtown in the capital city on this Tuesday. Hope your work week's off to a good start. Appreciate you hanging out with us here on 104.5 ESPN Baton Rouge. Jacob Beck and Cassie Spazzali back there on the ones and twos. Normal Tuesday suspects headed your way. Glen West at 1:30 talking Tigers. Sharif Ishak at 2:30 talking Saints. ESPN.com has put out their final top 250 for the Major League Baseball draft. We're going to get into LSU's high school prospects in hour number 2. I want to talk about Connor Ware, who I wrote about LouisianaSports.net today. Kind of in that same vein, what his decision is going to look like and what he potentially could be for LSU if he were to come back. And Alvin Kamara, is he in the top 10 running backs as ESPN goes through the top 10 at each position in the NFL? We'll talk about it in the next segment. Let's get things started the way we do every day with our Genesis opening drive.
It's time for Hunt's opening drive, presented by Genesis of Baton Rouge.
It was announced, or reported, I guess I should say, last night from the Oxford side of things and from the Baton Rouge side of things that LSU had made a new hire, added a new staffer to its recruiting operation, and he comes from Ole Miss. Kelvin Bolden, who has been the coordinator of recruiting strategy in Oxford for the last 3 years, is headed to Baton Rouge. Now, this is an era unlike any we've ever traversed here in the college sports landscape, and especially in the college football landscape, where you're talking about far larger rosters than baseball or basketball or women's basketball or softball. And you're talking about a lot of money, more money than is being doled out for women's basketball, men's basketball, baseball, softball. These recruiting operations are massive, and they don't look like they did 15 years ago, where you had a position coach who was also your recruiting coordinator, and your head coach was kind of the closer, and everybody had their little area, and you went and tried to get as much high-end high school talent as you possibly could and develop a roster year over year, run a program. Now, you certainly got to manage talent, but it's going out as fast as it's coming in. And you've got to handle the financial aspect of it, making sure that the players are satisfied with their compensation or they'll leave. It looks far more like the NFL than it does college football. And therefore, the administration and the composition of the football department looks different than it did 10 years ago. It's not just a head coach, some positional coaches, couple coordinators, and some analysts. You've got to have evaluation, not just the high school evaluation. You got to evaluate the entire country. It goes in the transfer portal, and you've got to manage that roster to understand if we lose this guy and this guy and this guy, how are we going to fill it with this guy and this guy and this guy? And the person that's been in charge of all of this for the last couple of years in Baton Rouge is Austin Thomas. Brian Kelly thinks Austin Thomas is awesome. Scott Woodward thinks Austin Thomas is awesome. The consensus around college football is that Austin Thomas is awesome. And he's been given a big influence in that building as to how that football program is going to operate. Where did Austin Thomas come from this time? Ole Miss. Who did he work with? Kelvin Bolden. It sounds like, based on Joe Sloan's tweet that had Austin Thomas in it, and what we're hearing from the Ole Miss side of things, is that this is a name and a hire that Austin Thomas was very much in favor of. I probably can go as far as to say spearheaded. He wants this guy in this role at LSU to help him put together the best roster year after year after year that LSU possibly can. So LSU made him an offer he couldn't refuse. Kelvin Bolden is going to become LSU's assistant general manager, not a position that's ever been held at LSU. It's a newly created position. He'll get a nice pay bump. It probably helps LSU to an extent that his children are high school age and are in Ocean Springs, Mississippi, which is closer to Baton Rouge than it is to Oxford. Oxford way up in the northern part of the state. Ocean Springs down south. And this is the move that he thinks is his best in terms of furthering his career. And LSU appears to be the beneficiary of that. Now, look, I can't look at Kelvin Bolden's body of work and adequately assess it. Like, there's no way for me to do that. If you hire an offensive coordinator that's been an offensive coordinator for 5 years and his offenses score 48 points per game, that's pretty good. If you hire an offensive coordinator who's been coordinating offenses for 5 years and he scores 9 points per game, that's not very good. If you hire a head coach whose lifetime winning percentage is 81%, that's really good. If it's 31%, it's not very good. There are numbers that I can sit here as a talking head and analyze when you make hires. I can't really do that with Kelvin Bolden in this instance because he's an off-field coach who is helping with recruiting. I don't know which of Ole Miss's top 20 classes he was the most involved in. I don't know what he does when he's in front of these student athletes on an official visit or an in-home visit. I don't know what makes him better as far as cultivating relationships with this player or with this guardian or like that's how am I supposed to? I don't know that. But what I can do is I can look at what the Ole Miss fan base and really football program thinks of him. Well, how do I do that? Well, Chase Parham, who is now with 24/7 Sports, who does an awesome job covering Ole Miss, broke this story from the Ole Miss side. He sent out a tweet yesterday at 7:15 p.m. that said the Ole Miss Director of Recruiting Strategy, Kelvin Bolden, is in talks to head to LSU in an elevated off-the-field role. Dropped a post and more on his message board, hearing it's likely already done. Here is the response to Chase's tweet from the Ole Miss fans. No, this is not ideal. No, come on, Ole Miss. Damn. No, 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 no. He was incredible. No, mistake not matching the offer. Well then, LSU putting Kiffin back in a locker. Imagine that. Very bad news. Awful news. KB is the man. Hate to see. I keep going. But this is the reaction from the Ole Miss side. It appears that those who have followed Ole Miss and have enjoyed the fact that Ole Miss has won 21 games in the last 2 years think he had a large hand in that. And it appears Austin Thomas feels that way too. And it appears Brian Kelly feels that way too. So that, on its face, looks awesome. Now, Ole Miss and LSU are not exactly the same when it comes to recruiting, but they've gotten closer in the last 2 years. Because for my entire life of following roster management in college football, LSU has recruited at the 4 and 5 star level, top 7, top 5 in the country perennially. Ole Miss has recruited 3 and 4 stars, tried to hold on for dear life in the state of Mississippi, ranked usually between 20 and 30, and that's where they've been in high school recruiting. Well, Lane Kiffin takes over and says, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're still probably not going to out-recruit Nick Saban at Alabama for high school kids. But if we can raise a bunch of money through this Grove Collective, and we can pay kids for 1 year to come here and outbid everybody else who's still trying to do this the old-fashioned way in recruiting high school kids, we may be able to catch up. And they have. Ole Miss, over the last 2 seasons, has been a top 4 SEC football program. It would be impossible to argue outside of that. And that's never been the case in my time watching Ole Miss football. And then Brian Kelly on the other side said, we're going to do this with high school players. We're going to recruit the best of the best from across the country with our national brand, and we're going to develop players, and we're not going to buy players. And then he watched Ole Miss buy players and watched his staff miss out on players because they weren't buying them. And he said, well, we should probably start buying players. And they did this past year. And they've got the number 1 transfer class in the country. So if that's the way you want to do this, and I realize that revenue sharing has been introduced now and things are a little bit different, but football at LSU is going to get a $15 million boon from this with the revenue sharing. So you can swim in the deep water with a lot of teams at $15 million revenue sharing. And Bolden's been in the middle of that for the last 3 years. So that's a long way of saying, like, I think this is a really good hire for LSU. I can't prove it because there's not a track record I can pull up on the internet or reach out and touch on a piece of paper. But the reputation is sterling. The results on the field for Ole Miss, even though he's not coaching them, have been excellent. And the guy that's in charge of running this thing, one rung below Brian Kelly and Austin Thomas, is vouching for him because he's worked with him, and everybody in Baton Rouge is okay with rubber stamping that. And so am I. So if this is a deal where it helps LSU and hurts Ole Miss in the process, sign me right on up for that. Because that's a team that you are directly competing with right now. One, on the field the last 2 years, and two, for a spot in the college football playoff. Both of these teams had similar seasons last year. I would argue that Ole Miss did so with a more talented roster, but LSU beat them down here because they made some plays when they absolutely had to late in that game. But this looks to be very, very good news for LSU. If you missed it last night, missed it today, just hop in the car. Kelvin Bolden, a former Southern Miss wide receiver who's gotten into the administrative side of college football and has been doing a great job off the field for Ole Miss, is coming in a similar role at LSU. It's a promotion in terms of title and in money. He'll be the assistant general manager to Austin Thomas, and those two guys will spearhead LSU's roster building moving forward. Kelvin Bolden headed to LSU. That is our Genesis opening drive. All right, still plenty to get to here on this Tuesday. Appreciate you hanging out with us. Glen West going to be with us in about 20 minutes talking LSU. I've got some baseball thoughts on LSU signing class at the top of hour number 2. When we come back, ESPN is doing their annual run through the NFL position by position. They started with running backs. I've gotten to defensive tackles. Today I wanted to go talk about the running backs. Is Alvin Kamara a top 10 running back in the NFL? We'll tell you what ESPN thinks. I'll tell you what I think next.
The Hunt Palmer Show.
One Bath and Closets. OneBathAndClosets.com is the website. David Vaughn and his team, 30 years redesigning and remodeling bathrooms and closets. Safety is a big, big deal when you talk about the bathroom, especially as folks age. If there's a loved one in your life that you feel like could be in a compromised position in the bathroom, could be in a hazardous situation in the bathroom, do what you can to mitigate that damage. Go ahead and put in non-slip floors, guardrails near slippery areas. Walk-in tub can be more convenient, safer. Shower with a bench in it. These are the things that David Vaughn and his team do all the time. If you want to start that process with that free consultation, say, hey, when can we start this and what will that look like? David Vaughn is happy to sit down with you and have that conversation. You can check him out at onebathandclosets.com, get that free consultation, see pictures of his great work, as well as some satisfied customers and their reviews. It's One Bath and Closets. You can find them online at onebathandclosets.com.
You're listening to The Hunt Palmer Show on 104.5 ESPN, Baton Rouge.
A little bit of breaking news. I'm going to talk about this in the next hour, but I'll relay the information to you here. As you well know, we'll be at SEC Football Media Days as a station next week. Crew is going to fly over to Atlanta on Sunday, and we'll be ready to rock for Monday morning with OTB. I'll be there from 1 to 3 every day, and then Matt will be on AFR from 3 to 6 every day. So 3 shows locally from SEC Media Days, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday of next week. And it was just announced who LSU is going to bring to SEC Football Media Days. And I got it right last week when we guessed. Of course, Garrett Nussmeier will be there, and Whit Weeks will be there. We assumed those two, and I just thought maybe based on a guy that could potentially be looking at a breakout year, a guy that's put in a lot of work, a guy that's overcome a lot of hardship in his time in Baton Rouge. Chris Hilton will be the other attendee for LSU. So Garrett Nussmeier, Whit Weeks, and Chris Hilton will be in Atlanta on Monday. LSU part of the first 4 teams that will take the stage on Monday. So I'll talk a little bit about those 3 guys coming on at the end and during hour number 2, but wanted to pass that along because we just got that email from the SEC office. So good for those 3 guys, and we will see them in Atlanta. All right, the ESPN every single year goes through right before training camp starts, and they go through every position on the field, and they talk to executives, coaches, scouts, and they compile a list of the top 10 players at every position on the field. And they started with running backs yesterday. They did defensive tackle today. The Saints did not have a defensive tackle that was even listed, and that's not a super surprising thing. I think Brian Brzee is a nice player, but I don't think that he was going to be a top 10 player in the league at this point. But the question that I had when I saw the list were coming out, I was like, okay, Kamara had a pretty good year last year. I mean, Alvin Kamara last year ran for a career high 950 yards. His previous high was 932 back in the COVID year of 2020. And I think Kamara could have potentially run for 1,000 this past year if they wanted to do that. If they wanted to push the envelope and get those last 50 yards late in the season, they probably could have. But no use in doing that because the season was pretty well cashed at that point. And before you say, well, he ran for 950, but it's a 17-game season. Well, Kamara missed 3 games last year when he was trying to run through broken ribs at one point. And finally, they said, okay, you need to take a seat for a little bit. And he did. But he ran for 950 yards in just 14 games last year. So I'm going, okay, I know he's going to his age 30 season, but is he a top 10 running back in the league? And so it starts where you know it's going to start with Saquon Barkley. Derrick Henry still at number 2 at age 31. Jahmyr Gibbs has ascended up to number 3 at this point for a great Detroit team. Then you've got Bijan Robinson in the Saints division at number 4 with Atlanta. Christian McCaffrey slipped a little bit. Obviously dealt with a lot of injuries last year. So he's number 5. Josh Jacobs, number 6 for Green Bay. Jonathan Taylor, number 7. So you're running out of time for Kamara here. James Cook with Buffalo, age 25 season, is number 8 on the list. Joe Mixon from the Houston Texans is number 9 on the list. And Alvin Kamara of the New Orleans Saints is number 10 on the list after not being ranked last year. A premier back in our rankings for years, Kamara fell to honorable mention last year after a few down seasons, though some evaluators see a slight decline. Kamara fought his way back to the top 10 thanks to 1,500 scrimmage yards last year. He appeared on nearly 60% of the voting ballots, but none in the top 6. The quote from an NFL offensive coach said, some of the elite traits are still there. He didn't have much of an offensive line or a supporting cast last year, but he can still take a screen for big yardage and still has great contact balance. And I think that's the thing with Kamara that has endured throughout his 20s. You're always going to potentially lose a step as you get to this point in your career. Maybe not be quite as elusive, not as shifty as you were when you were 23, 24 years old. But what Kamara has maintained to me is the ability to stay balanced, whether that's taking a hit, whether that's on a cut where he gets bumped, whether that's the patience that he shows in the open field to allow his blockers to go and then his stop and start change of direction. The balance to me is what has separated him and has maintained throughout his time as a New Orleans Saints running back. And so I think it's reasonable to suggest he's a top 10 back in the sport. You're looking at a guy who has never been, I mentioned an 1,000-yard back, but has been such a vital catch and run player in his career. I mean, look at some of these yardage totals, and I realize that I'm going back to his rookie year for this, but 826 yards receiving when he was the AP Rookie of the Year in 2017, and then 709 in 2018, and then 756 in 2020, and even the last couple of years, which he's missed a little bit of time, and those say he's taken a step back. 490 receiving yards 3 years ago, 466 2 years ago, and then this past season, he caught 68 balls for 543 yards. That's 8 yards per catch for Alvin Kamara. And I think the discussion with Kamara, and we had it all of the early season last year with would you pay him, would you not? I would not have. And it has nothing to do with Alvin Kamara as a player or as a professional. It has everything to do with where the Saints are and with what his age is. But they already made that decision. So that's not for debate anymore. He's back. 2-year deal. Okay. So what does that mean? Well, it means that you're going to get a reliable player who's generally on the field. He's missed more time over the last 5 years than he did early, but he's generally on the field. He's tough as nails. He's a true pro. He wants to be in New Orleans. He can still catch the ball and run with it. And now it's less about him competing for Offensive Player of the Year, him being a top 10 running back, him getting 1,000 yards, him helping the Saints win the Super Bowl, which it was in his early years. It's more about him teaching these young running backs, whether that's Kendre Miller or Devin Neal, and helping Tyler Shuck, a new quarterback, ease into his role as the number one signal caller. That's with running the ball. That's with pass protection. That's with being an emergency valve out of the backfield that Shuck can feel comfortable checking it down to and can still produce once he gets those opportunities. And I think he is a quality guy to have in that spot for that role. This is a guy that made 5 straight Pro Bowls to start his career. He was the Offensive Rookie of the Year, Pro Bowl, then was a second team AP All-Pro in 2020, and he made a Pro Bowl in 2021. He has not the last 3 years, but he's still productive. He's still a great teammate, and he's a guy you want in the locker room. I just may not have extended to that point. And the question I was asking myself today is, okay, where does Kamara rank in the modern era of the Saints, the last 25 years? Say this quarter century. You're seeing a lot of quarter century lists being, tossed out there. And I would not put Kamara in Drew Brees category. And like Jari Evans, as far as accomplishments, is more accomplished than Alvin Kamara. Cam Jordan has been tremendous and is likely a Hall of Fame player, which I don't think at this point Kamara is. And then you've got this group of guys, whether it's Michael Thomas for the crazy start he had to his career, Demario Davis for the incredible productivity and longevity, Marcus Colston for being the best receiver productivity-wise in the Saints' history, Terran Armstead, Ryan Ramczyk, Carl Nix, Jonathan Vilma. That's the company that Kamara keeps. And I think if you start to chop it up, he's somewhere, 5 to 9 of the best Saints in this golden era of the last 25 years. And I realize the golden era only goes 20 years, but I think it's a round number if you can cut it off at 2000. That doesn't include Willie Rofe, and it doesn't include Ricky Jackson. It doesn't include Morton Anderson. Doesn't include Archie Manning. But in this era of Saints football, the last 25 years, he's a top 5 or 6 player. And I think he's the greatest running back in the history of the franchise. Now, Mark Ingram's going to have more yards, and Deuce is beloved for good reason in New Orleans. But me watching Kamara, and maybe it's just because it was the perfect offense for him, where it was not necessarily a ground and pound offense like Deuce was in, and he had help from Ingram, who was running between the tackles, and he was just the guy making the flashy plays on the perimeter, and maybe that skewed my opinion a little bit. But I just found him to be an exceptionally versatile and productive back, and one that I would love to take. Maybe you don't take it if you're trying to run the old Cowboys offense with Emmitt Smith and Troy Aikman and just the best offensive line and pound it forward. But if you're talking about the Saints who were spreading the field, who were creating some space, who had a quarterback that was very, very willing to check it down in Drew Brees, who knew he was going to get 6 yards for sure and maybe 60 from Kamara, that's a valuable dude to have. And it was a perfect fit at the perfect time. And I think that his career in New Orleans is going to be remembered very, 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 very fondly when that comes to an end, probably in 2 more years. But it's a different role for him now for the next 2 years. It's not try to win Offensive Player of the Year. It's, okay, be a mentor, be productive, but be a comfort blanket for Tyler Shuck as he eases into his role as the quarterback of the New Orleans Saints. So very cool that Alvin Kamara is still thought of in league circles as a top 10 back in the league. You're going to need him to be that with the money that you're paying him. And there are people that think he certainly can be. So Alvin Kamara thought of as the number 10 running back in the National Football League by the folks that ESPN.com spoke with. I don't disagree with that. So that's our Saints discussion for the first hour today. We'll get to Sharif Ishak in hour number 2. If you're looking for Saints coverage, you can always find it. Hunt on Saints. We're easing closer and closer to training camp. If you're looking for that Saints news, LouisianaSports.net has got you covered as well. So let's move forward. Glen West talking Tigers when we come back.
The Hunt Palmer Show. This is the Hunt Palmer Show on 104.5 ESPN, Baton Rouge.
Going back out to the Jim's Fire and Sightlines, where we find our guy Glen West, senior writer over at Go 24/7, all your team coverage, recruiting coverage, football, basketball, baseball. They got you covered over there at Go 24/7. Glen joins us now. Glen, how we doing?
Good, Hunt. Just trying to catch up on some sleep after a little Puerto Rico trip last week, but we're okay.
Survived?
I survived. I do have one little funny story, I guess, that happened out there. That's I guess radio appropriate. I went surfing for the first time last week with 7 or 8 different buddies of mine, and arrived to the surf shop, and of course none of the boards are long enough for me, so they give me a paddleboard, and I was trying to surf with a paddleboard the whole time, and so I was able to get up a couple times towards the end, but man, those things are long and bulky and just really hard to navigate.
Surf one, a never surfed before 6'10" guy out there trying to shred some waves. I can imagine that was a bit of a struggle, but I'm glad you made it. Glad you're back, and it's time now to start kind of looking toward football a little bit. LSU just announced Garrett Nussmeier, Whit Weeks, and Chris Hilton will be the attendees in Atlanta for SEC Football Media Days. Is that surprising in any way to you?
No, I think it makes a lot of sense. And obviously Nuss was there last year, and so he's the quarterback and the guy that I think the leader of this team. And I think the media is really going to love, kind of the outside media is really going to love getting to talk with Whit Weeks. I mean, the guy just has a smile on his face 24/7 when talking about football, and should be a really good quote for a lot of guys outside of just the LSU media. And then, look, I think the one that really stood out to me, though, is Chris Hilton. I mean, this is a guy who's been through a lot in his career, had to overcome a lot of injuries to get to this point. And Brian Kelly doesn't just take anybody on these trips to Atlanta. I mean, he takes well-respected voices out there for these media days. And Chris Hilton has definitely gotten himself to a point here where he's one of the more respected leaders and one of the older players in this program. So really excited to see what Chris has to say out there, and just kind of the 5-year journey that he's been on to get to this point.
Where do you think he fits in on this receiving core right now?
I don't think that there is another receiver that has the natural chemistry that Garrett Nussmeier has with Chris Hilton. Like they took him a little while just because he was injured for so much of the year, but you really saw it towards the end of the season there in that Oklahoma game and in that Baylor game, just what his presence does on the field for Nussmeier in that offense. And so I think if he's able to stay healthy this year, and I know that's been a big if so far in his career, he could really have a big season for LSU, maybe an unexpected season for a lot of people. And I think he's got a lot of talent to be a real, not just a deep vertical threat guy, but a guy who can be a playmaker in the middle of the field and pick up some big yards after the catch. I think he's due for a really nice season if he's able to stay healthy.
Whit Weeks has had an interesting 2 years at LSU, and now obviously coming off an injury for year 3, but they expect him to be a full go as of right now, well before the start of camp. Where do you fit the puzzle pieces between Perkins, Weeks, Keys, and whoever you may think is vying for time at linebacker?
Yeah, I think you'll probably see a lot of Whit and West playing together. I think you'll see a lot of Whit and Devon Keys playing together. I think the bigger question for me with Perkins is just going to be, how much does LSU want to experiment with that nickel spot this year, bringing a guy like Tamarcus Cooley in from NC State? Is he a more natural deep safety, or do they think he can play closer to the line of scrimmage at one of those nickel safety spots? And I think that's going to be kind of the question mark there, is how much does Cooley play on the outside in that nickel role, and how much do they want Perkins on the field in that star role? Like I don't see them going back to a scenario where Perkins is playing in the box. Maybe you put him out there for a snap or two every once in a while, but his primary position is going to have to be as an off-ball linebacker and in that star role. And so I think the bigger question is, does LSU see Cooley also in that role, and just kind of how does that dynamic work? Or do they think Perkins can be there full-time and be a kind of an every down player at that star position?
Better chance for Nussmeier. He runs the ball significantly more than he did last year, or cuts significantly down on the interceptions?
I think he runs the ball a lot more. I think that, look, the turnovers with him are going to be kind of embedded into his game a little bit. I don't expect him to go from like 12 to 4 interceptions or anything like that. I think he still will throw some, but hopefully not as many. I think that the running aspect here is something that maybe can help take away some of those turnovers. Maybe it'll be a situation where he sees something where he would maybe last year try to force it, and then maybe he'll try to run the ball and try to pick up some yards. And I think that's all things that he has to kind of have on his mind here this offseason as he's developing. But I mean, the quote that we got from him at the Manning Passing Academy I guess 2 weeks ago now, was really the thing that stood out to me the most that we've heard from him this summer, and that's been just how much he's worked on his body, how much he feels like he will be more comfortable taking off in those opportunities when they do present themselves. And so I think for him, it's just going to be about knowing when to balance that out, and when to take the deep shots, and when to if a running lane opens, when to take it, and sliding and all that stuff. So I would say probably more leaning into the running game aspect of his overall execution as a quarterback is going to help him tremendously this year.
Last one on the football side of things. Your thoughts on where the media picks LSU and when they rank them 1 to 16?
I would imagine they're in that top 5, 6 range. I don't know that they'll get as high as top 3, top 2, but everything that I've read this offseason, the national media seems pretty high on the talent that LSU has. I think it's just a question of how much do they think that that's going to translate to wins in the SEC. And so I would imagine they're in the top 5, 6, but saying that they were going to be ahead of Georgia or Texas or maybe even a Tennessee or an Alabama or something like that, I think that's maybe a little bit of a stretch, but certainly right there in that next tier of teams outside of the top 2 or 3 that are going to really go into the season with high expectations of winning the entire SEC.
Glen West, our guest, senior writer over at Go 24/7. Let's switch over briefly to baseball here as the draft approaches. We won't talk to you again until we have seen the conclusion of the Major League Baseball draft. So your thoughts on a couple of the Tigers who are coming back to the team or leaving to go to the draft, not necessarily the high school and portal guys. Ethan Fry, Chase Shores, Zach Cowan. We talked about it last week, but any change in your thoughts on that?
Not really. I think Shores is probably a goner. I think that's a really easy decision there. I think probably the one that on the pitching side that you maybe have that conversation with about returning is Zach Cowan. I think they can get Zach Cowan back, that he can come in and be a starter for LSU next year, or just continue to pitch in the same role that he did. I mean, he's been a very valuable pitcher, obviously, last year for what he was able to do for him. But you get Zach Cowan back, I think you feel a lot better about the pitching staff and the returning core that you have with that group. On the position player side, I keep going back and forth on Ethan Fry. I think there's a big part of him that would probably love to come back for next year and be a central piece to this offense and this team, and that could be ultimately what he decides. But I think he really has to weigh betting on himself, coming back and developing as a position player and as a hitter, knowing that next year you'll probably sacrifice some signing bonus money, but maybe it's better for your long-term future as in terms of getting to the big leagues. That's kind of, I think, the conversation that he's probably weighing right now. I would probably lean that he signs somewhere. Same goes with Chris Stanfield. I think you've probably seen him sign elsewhere as well. But those are kind of the two guys, I think, on the position player side that you really have to look at from a returning core as guys that maybe you potentially could get back, but probably are going to lose.
Connor Ware, any thoughts there?
Oh, that's a good one. I hadn't really thought about Connor. I think they can get him back. I mean, I just don't know where his draft stock is. I mean, he's not anywhere in that top kind of 200 range that I've seen, but you don't really have to be that. I mean, if he's drafted somewhere in the first 10 rounds, it's probably a pretty strong indication that he's going to go play professional ball. But he's somebody that, look, we talked about a lot last fall and into the spring as one of their best arms. He looked like one of the guys that they were going to go to in those situations. And, just didn't really translate as well in the SEC, and certainly in the postseason, there just weren't many opportunities for him. But if he does come back, he can certainly work on his control and his command and be a really valuable left-handed arm. But I think the fact that they've gone in and they've gotten 3 transfer portal arms that are all lefties gives you a little bit of an indication that they're okay there if they do lose him.
I got to ask this question. I'll toss it to you and see what your thoughts are. Somebody said, is there any chance that if Fry and Stanfield leave that Ashton Larson comes back? said, well, I mean, that's literally possible. I know you don't have to go anywhere. You can come on back. I don't know what the feeling would be from LSU or if he would have any interest in that, but I'll toss it to you. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's certainly just because you enter the portal doesn't mean you can't come back from the portal. I don't think that's happened with baseball here in recent years, but this is certainly a new age that we live in, and I think, look, the big thing here for anybody that LSU brings in to work at that other outfield spot, they're just going to have to find a guy that can swing the bat for average, guy that maybe hopefully has some SEC experience, or even if he doesn't, somebody that can just hold his own out there in the outfield. You've got a really strong core with Curiel and Brown next year. Just somebody that can make the plays, be a routine player, a real team player, I should say. That's what they really are going to be looking for with this other outfield spot. And maybe it's somebody that's still in the portal. Maybe it's one of these freshmen that they get on campus next year. But there's certainly some options, I think, to still work out after the draft is over.
He's Glen West, senior writer over at Go 24/7. Glad you made it back stateside, and we'll talk to you next week.
All right. Thanks, Hunt. Appreciate it.
Yeah, that's Glen West. All your team coverage, baseball, basketball, football, and recruiting. They got you handled over there at Go 24/7. I'm going to go through all of the players that are ranked in ESPN's most recent, the last top 250 from a baseball scouting perspective. We'll do that at the top of hour number 2, so 16 minutes from right now. I'll get into kind of what I think about some of the high school guys. More so what ESPN thinks about them. Maybe on Friday I dive more deeply into what I actually think is going to happen. I'm still doing a little bit of digging on a couple angles for that perspective, but I want to start that discussion here this week because I think it's pretty relevant. And then one of the guys I asked Glen West about there in that segment is Connor Ware and what could be his fate this weekend and potentially next year. I'll kind of tell you what I think about that when we come back to close out hour number 1 next.
The Hunt Palmer Show.
Genesis of Baton Rouge. GenesisofBatonRouge.com is that website. Every car that is on the lot is online at GenesisofBatonRouge.com. Every single model in the line, IHA top safety pick. All of them. Entry model, highest end. SUV, down to the sedan. All top safety picks. When you get behind the wheel of a Genesis, you are getting behind the wheel of one of the safest cars on the road. And the process to get there couldn't be easier. They got a wonderful staff, an incredible website. It's got the entire lot right there at the click of a button. But go by and see them, Airline at Piku. Chat with one of those brand ambassadors. You're going to feel like a guest, not a customer. You're not going to be taken advantage of or pressured or upsold. They're just going to help you get behind the wheel of a Genesis because the odds are most of you have not been behind the wheel of a Genesis. Let's change that. Go see them, Airline at Piku, across from Women's Hospital. Visit them online, GenesisofBatonRouge.com, GenesisofBatonRouge.com.
You're listening to The Hunt Palmer Show on 104.5 ESPN, Baton Rouge.
Hour number 1 here. I wanted to talk about Connor Ware. Probably not a guy that a lot of LSU fans are thinking a lot about at this point because you didn't see him in the postseason. And because his year, by the standards that we talked him up, and I'm very, very, very much included in that, he didn't live up to that. And that's an easy guy to kind of bury out of your mind as draft time comes. But I want to paint the whole picture here because Connor Ware did not allow an earned run against LSU in the fall in the inter squads. And I went back and found a tweet from David Seifert, who's D1 Baseball's prospect guy. And he was at LSU ULL in the fall scrimmage that the Tigers and Cajuns played. And he tweeted out Connor Ware dominating, working 91-94, likely starter for the Tigers. That's what he saw in the fall from Connor Ware. And this is also difficult to remember. His first 2 outings were against Southern and then the start at Dallas Baptist. And in those 2 outings, he combined to throw 7 innings, 1 hit, 1 earned run, 8 strikeouts, and 1 walk. 8 strikeouts, 1 walk, 7 innings, 1 run in those 2 outings. And that looked like, statistically, the guy that I saw in the fall, the guy that the staff saw in the fall, the guy that scouts saw in the fall. And then, after those 2 outings, he threw 12 2/3 innings. And he issued 17 walks. I mean, that's just an astronomical number. And the end of the road for Connor Ware this season was giving him the start in the first game, which was a Thursday at South Carolina in the finale. And he walked 4 guys and hit another one in 1 inning. And at that point, and I wrote this at LouisianaSports.net, I said it on the show, like, you're out of runway at that point. Can't go to you. And they didn't. They didn't go to him once in the postseason. They found their guy from the left side that was going to be Williams. Primo got up a few times and was going to be available as well, and you were going to go to Shores, and you were going to go to Cowan, and you were going to go to Evans if you needed to, but you weren't going to go down the line far enough to get to a guy that was not throwing strikes. But Connor Ware is still left-handed. He's still 6'4". He's still 220 pounds. He can still throw 93, 94 miles an hour, and he still has 4 pitches. And he still pitched 2 years in junior college, and both years his ERA was under 2. And he still threw the ball great in the fall last year against LSU. So I'm not here to tell you that Connor Ware is just toast. Now, I think it's probably a little bit more likely than not that he gets drafted somewhere in the 6th, 8th round and gets a signing bonus, somewhere in the neighborhood of $240,000 and goes. Like, that's what I think is going to happen. But if he does get bypassed or does set a number that is higher than that and does want to come back and try to fight for a spot on the mound on this LSU roster that he knows what they're capable of. He was there in Omaha. He knows what that can be like to pitch on that mound. Maybe he wants to come back and try it. And I would not rule it out that he becomes a starting pitcher on next year's roster. I would not rule it out that he becomes a high leverage reliever on next year's roster. Again, I think it's more likely than not he signs. But in the discussions that I've had, it sounds like that's going to be a 50-50 proposition. And he does have one soundboard to go off of it. Not a lot of folks have in this position. His brother, Bryson, was a really good player at Auburn and is in the Phillies minor league system right now. So Connor knows what playing in the SEC is like from a lifestyle perspective, and he knows what the minor leagues are like because his brother, Bryson's doing it right now. And he can weigh that in addition to the money. I don't know what LSU is prepared to do for him NIL-wise. I know that LSU baseball does not have a lot of revenue-sharing dollars that they can just dole out. They're in that piece of the pie with everybody except football, men's basketball, and women's basketball. So you're not going to get rich being in Connor Ware's position coming back to LSU baseball. But he's probably not going to get rich wherever he's fielding phone calls in the draft. I think this is one to watch if you're an LSU fan. I think there's more in Connor Ware's tank. I think he'll be a better pitcher next year than he was this past year. Question is that in high A Rochester or is that in the Southeastern Conference? Because you don't have to teach Connor Ware to strengthen his arm and throw 4 miles an hour harder. You don't have to teach Connor Ware to throw a third pitch. You don't have to teach Connor Ware to spin a breaking ball. He can do all of those things already. He didn't throw it over the plate enough. It's the same thing with William Schmidt. Schmidt's younger. But there's a lot of potential in those arms. Now, LSU is guarded against losing Ware because they went and got left-hander from Oregon, left-hander from North Dakota State, left-hander from Tennessee, bring Primo back, got a couple in your class. You hope to get to campus. You may or may not. We'll talk about that next. But if they bring Connor Ware back, I think he's got a chance to be a factor in some capacity on the mound for LSU, and I'll be paying attention to that one for sure. So that's my thought. I've got a more in-depth piece up at LouisianaSports.net right now that kind of details what that decision may look like. So if you want to read that for free, you can certainly go over and check that out at LouisianaSports.net. 17 guys in LSU's baseball signing class? 17. I'll tell you in the next segment after SportsCenter how many of those 17s are ranked in the ESPN's latest and greatest and last top 250, and which ones could be significant draft risks. We're going to start easing into that the back half of this week on the Hunt Palmer Show.
The Hunt Palmer Show.